the sponge, like wets itself.
Because it's scared. Because it's just like in those Japanese animes.
Right.
Welcome to NOCLIP. I'm Chad Garland.
I'm JJ Artemis.
And I'm Andy Cannon.
And today we're going to be talking about Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid is a game that came out in 1998 on the PlayStation 1. Was developed and published by Konami. And I'm not going to bother with this, but it was re-released like a couple of times. There was a re-release that we actually played on PlayStation 3 that came as part of a like Metal Gear Legacy collection, I think is the actual name, and also was remade in the early 2000s at some point as the Twin Snakes on the GameCube. I assume as a justification for including Solid Snake in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Because as far as I can tell, Konami didn't really have much of a relationship with Nintendo other than that, so...
They had a literal relationship. They had like, were they in the same office building or some shit like that?
This would be... That is so far outside the realm of things I know about video games. Like, where the offices of publishers are is not something that I, like, keep in my mind.
You're not really nearly plugged in enough to the news, Jed. I mean, E3 is going on right now.
As we speak.
And we're here recording a podcast instead of listening to the bounty of gaming news and coolness.
Have you heard our show?
Yes.
We only talk about games that came out like 20 years ago.
We also like shit on game shows.
We did shit on the
about
Golden
games.
Joystick Awards.
Oh, I thought you just meant... Never mind.
Not game shows like Family Feud.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that made sense with the 20 years ago theme.
Right. For some reason, when you
bit of a
said game
stretch.
shows, the only things that came to mind for me were board games, which is not the same.
Because I was going to say game award shows, but E3 is not one of those.
Right. It's like a press conference.
Right.
Yeah.
Anywho.
It's a game stage, like, exposition?
Sure. It was the Electronic Entertainment Exposition.
Oh my god, Expo is short for exposition.
It sure is. So Metal Gear Solid's like a stealth action game. And according to Wikipedia, it's one of the greatest and most important games of all time, lending it sort of an air of gravitas that I wasn't expecting from a Wikipedia article. Though I agree at least that it's extremely important, and for its time, it was an incredibly, it's a very deep game. It's one of those games that, has systems, but then also the developers sort of, probably went through the game and was like, what would be, this is a thing that we have, can we make it do something else too? And I think that's the thing that I most admire about this game.
You're talking about in terms of literal enemy design and counter design, or you're talking about, we have a controller that rumbles, let's make you massage yourself with it?
Like items, you can use the cigarettes for 5 different things.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing
stuff.
because it's actually all of that. Enemies behave in ways that you could, with the exception of the fact that they're all basic. They have the depth perception of someone who with no eyes, and the game opens with that whole line. It's the GNM soldiers have extremely advanced sight and hearing, but their vision cone represented on the radar is way shorter than a human being's eyesight would be. But other than that, they behave in ways that you can manipulate in ways that make sense. The items all have a bunch of different uses, and the encounter designs, that was a little bit harder to quantify because it's sort of a nebulous concept of you should just encounter things. Mm-hmm. But I mean, still the same thing applies. There's 100 different approaches to any given situation. Not any given situation. There's somewhere the approach is to hide behind a box.
But this game absolutely has both. It both set forward this precedent where you'd have items that you had to start contextually thinking about not as game objects but as things that do stuff in the real world, like lighting a cigarette to stop your hand trembling.
Right.
And this game also has what are often the beginnings of these huge cinematic set piece moments that have defined like AAA games essentially since the creation of Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily Metal Gear Solid that kicked off that trend, but the fact that this game has these pre-rendered in-engine cutscenes and voice acting through the whole game was a big part in sort of the early 2000s merging of film and game that a lot of developers attempted to actualize, I guess.
It even managed to do voice acting really, really well out of the gate. Like, a lot better even than a lot of PS2 era games that attempted to sort of ape on the importance of what was at the time still like a recently new capacity for like digital discs to allow you.
Of course, the result of this is that this game is 2 discs because they didn't want to compress the audio. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, is a good decision, I think. It's odd, I think, that the discs... that disc 2 starts so late into the game.
Yeah, it's like not even a third of the total game is on disc 2, which is a little bit weird. But better. I think that was a better decision than to like cut stuff out to fit all on one disc. Because
if there's anything that I want in my life, it's David Hayter going Metal Gear, and not David Hayter going like Metal Gear. Like bit crunched versions of the audio would just be really
bad.
Yeah, I feel like they can make it work for the codec conversations as like a simulation of radio static, but there's no excuse for like Revolver Ocelot standing in a room with you sounding like an NES trying to like squeak out some noises or whatever.
They could have just given you headphones the whole time and had all the characters be forced to communicate with you like via radio exclusively.
Oh yeah,
could have had Ocelot in their room, just like hold up.
Well, the codec is like Deus Ex communication, because it is this insane technology where the game takes... I don't know if you're aware of this. The game takes place in 2005, which is hilarious any year after 2005, as is anything that takes place in the near future. But the codec is like the most unbelievable piece of technology that is, as far as I can tell, unless this is like a real thing that can exist, where it's like the codec is a piece of technology that I guess is embedded in your skull and directly vibrates the bones of your ear. And then additionally, to speak, you don't actually have to like speak it. You just like... They completely ignore the fact that tongues and lips are important in speech because it like implies that you just sort of make the sounds in your throat and it transmits it.
There's obviously, tongues and speech, very important. Don't want to diminish tongues and speech at all. But that I think was also based on like a really fine bit of like science that a lot of these near future things like to like spin off into crazy pseudoscience webs.
Right.
Even in the modern day, there's some interesting research that you can see that when people are thinking themselves privately, that there's movement in like your voice box essentially. It's really disgusting if you look up videos of it, because you can get a tube down, they look at the movements and stuff. Yeah. But you can. But thinking often will trigger that. So hypothetically, you could make a device that interprets that into speech. Maybe
you think?
Does this explain why sometimes when people are listening to you speak, they like mouth the words that you're saying?
I don't know.
Have you ever seen people do this?
No, that sounds terrifying.
I've seen a lot of people do this.
Who does this to you?
I'm not gonna put these people on blast, but I do know people who do that like habitually.
How many people?
That is weird.
I've met at least 3 people in my life.
Are they related?
No.
But anyway, do you think that is more unbelievable than an actual Metal Gear?
Right. Well, the Metal Gear...
It's a piece of technology.
It's just... The codec is such a good example of it, I think, because while I find the concept of a codec super unbelievable, I also think that they use it in such a way and downplay its like incredibleness in such a way that it's just like you immediately just accept it. Like at no point during my first playthrough of Metal Gear Solid, well maybe during my first playthrough, I played Metal Gear Solid 2 before I played this game, but the first time I was introduced to a codec, I wasn't like, this is ridiculous.
Right.
Like, I would probably just said, this is a radio.
Right. Is the screen actually, like, present in the game, or is that just for the player's benefit? Like, actually seeing the two characters?
It's never really explained, as far as I know.
Yeah.
I don't believe that you're supposed to think that Snake is looking at, like
a wrist communicator?
Right, yeah.
Because that's what I thought.
Well, in like, Metal Gear
I'm...
Solid 3, what they did was whenever you're on a codec conversation, it's not a codec anymore, I don't think, it's just a radio. Because it takes place in the 60s. And the images are like photographs that are paper clipped to a folder of the person, and you can like flip through them, and it makes an audible like manila folder noise when you do.
Okay.
So like I don't know if he's carrying around like a briefcase or if it's just supposed to represent like his memory of seeing their picture.
He's got. I'm sure he's got fucking files. I mean,
well, why? Why would you take files to the jungle?
Files are really thin and lightweight.
But he doesn't carry like a backpack, and they're also big.
Also, it would be like really bad if you
can't just stuff them in his pants.
Also, worst case scenario, you keep in mind that in Metal Gear Solid 3, you start the game with a suicide pill. So like that mentality does not bleed into let's take information about my support team in case I get captured, so they know who to call.
Yeah. He probably had to study those on the plane ride or helicopter ride to his mission.
Alright, fine, then maybe he doesn't have actual bunch of manila envelopes, like, stuffed in and around his belt.
He's, like, crouched down behind, like, a boulder, and he's, like, leaping through.
Goddamn. What even started this whole spiel about the codec?
I don't just brought it up.
I don't know or care, but we can't get off of this spiel yet because I have a bone to pick with you.
Okay.
About thinking
a directly vibrated ear bone to pick with you.
Yes.
Because you, Andy, apparently think that a Metal Gear couldn't exist.
Well, I don't think it couldn't exist. I just asked Chad if he thought it was more unbelievable than the codec.
There's definitely an argument you made that it couldn't exist because the same thing that all giant things in media do, it just totally ignores the square cube law.
I don't know
with
what that
not being
means.
like, I'm such not a physics stickler in games and movies and stuff, but like, yes, technically speaking, the Metal Gear would collapse under its own weight. I think. Like, I don't know like the exact numbers, nor would I be able to do the math if I did know them. But that is a thing. Like, somebody pointed out that like the Jaegers in Pacific Rim would like sink into the ocean floor so deep that they would not be able to move anymore. Like they would just like the instant that they were put on the ocean floor, they would just like drop to their shoulders because they would be so heavy.
Yeah, the ocean floor is also very not like rock or
right. Yeah, mostly like mud.
Yeah, it's like thick feces and death.
There's also feces there.
Yeah.
We can't ignore the feces. Anyway, so that's why Metal Gear can't exist.
Google the square cube law. Right? Is that it? On
yeah,
your
the
own
square
time.
cube law. I'll put the Wikipedia link in the episode description. Either way, though, I think what actually started this whole conversation was the fact that everything in this game has like multiple functions and is. And their attention to detail on things is insane.
Yeah, I think that they did it to such a degree that, like, when there was an example of a time that they didn't do that, it really stood out.
Yeah.
Because, like, for example, the handkerchief later on in the game, I kept trying to, like, figure out stuff to do with it. Because, like, you get it right before the part where you get the cold. So I kept thinking they were linked, handkerchief and having a cold. So I was like, I'll equip the handkerchief so that when Snake coughs, he'll cough into the handkerchief.
And then maybe alert guards.
And then maybe, it'll muffle it, and then maybe I can give it to somebody else to get them sick. Or I kept thinking of like weird things like that, and it's just like, nope, it just makes the wolves not attack you.
Yeah. The handkerchief, I think, is a particularly egregious example because it is, like, it's an everyday object that has many uses. Like, I know lots of people who carry a handkerchief just because it's super useful to have one around. Mm-hmm. And Snake is like, nope, just for wolves. Yeah. And none of the people I know have ever been attacked by wolves, so it probably does that too.
Yeah, or I kept thinking, like, maybe, like, I'd get hurt, or Meryl would get hurt, and I could, like, you know, patch them up with the handkerchief or something.
Yeah.
Nope.
That does become a thing in Metal Gear Solid 3 in the most egregious, like, weird cure menu thing, but not in this game.
Yeah.
But everything else, though, and I mean, they take it to an even greater extent in Metal Gear Solid 2, the way better Metal Gear game.
They had time and technology and money and so many other cool things that this game only kind of had.
Yeah. This game does suffer a little bit from just not having the freedoms that MGS2 did.
But man, do I love it anyway. I so regret not just stumbling upon this game as like a 10-year-old. I was not a PlayStation household. I didn't have this potential experience. But God, so many like 10-year-old mind-blowing things contained within the initial Metal Gear Solid. I would have been making decoy octopus jokes of my own to other children who probably also would not have gotten them.
Yeah.
Or been proud.
What is it? Because you just played Metal Gear Solid 1 for the first time a couple of years ago?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I had not touched any Metal Gear game and just resolved myself that I was going to beat all of the Metal Gear Solid series in a summer. Mm-hmm. And I did, and it was cool. It was really cool. And made me appreciate more and more the public perception of Kojima as like a literal madman and crazy person.
Yeah.
I remember just spending maybe like 40 minutes just dumbfounded in my apartment as I was listening to this PlayStation 1 game like harp on about like the importance of environmental conservation while like pictures of FMV deer were on screen after I like stopped a nuclear war and blew up a mech. It was
there's so much in that statement that I do want to talk about. But during this like brief history section, you just played the game, Andy,
for the first time.
Right. Over this last week.
Yeah, and I guess I had a much different experience than JJ because I felt like all the expectation and like hype that this game has around it, and you said the Wikipedia page says it's one of the greatest games of all time and one of the most important games ever made. And I knew it that way by reputation, and I think that really like negatively affected my opinion of this game. Because like I remember starting it out and it just feeling like super quaint and like not much was going on and it didn't look very good and it controlled kind of sloppy, and I was like, This is Metal Gear?
What about that opening credits sequence, Andy? What about that lovely, like, they just drop you in to your introductory tutorial section while the credits roll on screen?
That like once again, at the time, that was probably cool, but that feels so normal now.
It does?
Yes.
Oh.
Also, as a
I don't mean to shit on the game. I appreciate a lot about it, and it got better for me as it went along. But like, it really underwhelmed me at first, and I found myself shocked at how much I was not enjoying it.
Yeah, I actually sort of fall into the same boat. I think I would. It's safe to say that I have more of an appreciation for the game generally than Andy does, but. I played this game originally right after I had finished Metal Gear Solid 2 for like the third time. So I want to say like 2004 or 5 in that area. I went back and played the PlayStation 1 version of this game. And since I've played the PS1 version twice and the Twin Snakes 2 or 3 times, something in that area. And yeah, going back to this game feels pretty weird, I think. Like, I don't think that it holds up to age in the way that a much simpler game would. But this game's complexity leads it to be bound to like the kind of bizarre way they chose to structure both the controls and the way that the game plays in order to get around technical limitations, time limitations, anything that nowadays still gimps a game from like living up to its full potential. I think that were present in this game and are the kind of things that just get way worse with time than things like graphics do.
Did they copyright the whole like holding in the triggers to switch through your menu slider thing?
I don't know, but I've definitely never seen it in another game.
I know. Why is it the case? I love that little thing. In Metal Gear Solid and in all the sequels since. Mm-hmm. It's so fun for me to do this little auto-pause situation. It's a way to break up the action in all these difficult circumstances when switching through all of your items.
Yeah.
So time to think.
Well, I think it was I think it's a good choice. Actually, I like it a lot, and as with many things, I think its implementation later in the series is a little bit better.
Yeah.
But specifically the fact that in later games you can just like tap L2 and R2 to switch or to like unequip the item and re-equip it, which makes things like in this, which weirdly in Metal Gear Solid 2 you have first-person aim at any time, whereas in this game you don't, and it's locked to certain weapons. So the sniper rifle's the Stinger. And being able to unequip with one button would be so much better in this game than in the other games, but the other games are the ones where it was implemented. But other than that, I would say that I like that inventory. It keeps you out of like true menus and gives you access to everything sort of at once. It's nice.
It's almost like a cinematic menu in a way, if that's an interesting way that I can think to describe it. Like,
it's an interesting way to describe it. I don't know that I understand.
Like, because if you go through it in a traditional menu experience in other games that existed at the time, and still tons of games later, like think to Breath of the Wild for a recent example. Normally when you open a menu, they're trying to optimize everything so much for condensing the information, partially because modern games, and even a lot of older games, a lot to throw in so many systems and so many items that you need that extra screen space to get things done.
Right.
So, because they somewhat limited the item density here in Metal Gear Solid, instead of like literally changing everything that you were looking about and throwing you into this like abstraction of what was going on, something that I think I didn't really like, for example, about the cure menu in Metal Gear Solid 3, they give you this weird half menu that takes up, it's literally down in a corner away from the screen, everything else is maintained, and it looks sort of in the same strange futuristic style of like the codec and a lot of the other like actually within narrative does exist systems of the game.
Yeah.
And so it reminds me a lot of the HUD in Metroid Prime in that sense, where you have a HUD that, even though it doesn't really make any sense for why it would exist, has like enough of like a vague narrative justification that you don't think about it and feels like a real thing that's going on instead of what it actually is, which is just a menu screen for you to make the game easier.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of the same argument that we had for the existence of certain like menu screens in Assassin's Creed, where that game sort of backpedaled on it because they had something that in universe makes sense but hurts your immersion in the game itself because it's of a different part of the game than you typically are even in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's really smart for them to like look at their screen space like real estate and say like the edges of the frame are usually not important, so we can like slap a little weapon menu right there and not have to completely change the viewpoint of the player.
Yeah. I also really like the fact that it bends around the corners so that you select
like
the selections in the vertex. Yeah, that way you don't end up with... Because, there's so many bad ways to do a menu, and this is definitely not one
I
of
almost
them.
wish it didn't even pause the game. Like, I feel like they could have implemented it that way, because it's usually quick enough to cycle through them that you could just do it on the fly.
I feel like that actually would have worked in this game. In later games, maybe not as
in
much.
Boss fights.
Right.
You probably wouldn't be able to do it there, but...
Yeah. I know in later games in the series, like Metal Gear Solid 2, one of the things that I don't particularly like about it is the fact there are just so many items that you end up with, like, you'll be scrolling, you'll be like, I need to get to, like, the Pentazamin pill, and you have to scroll through, like, 5 cardboard boxes that all have their own spot on the menu.
Yeah, and it certainly like leaps and bounds better than what was going on at the time. Like even if you look at this game's like contemporaries, like Ocarina of Time or like Final Fantasy VII, those menus are like awful.
Yeah, they sure are.
Just huge messes.
Yeah, of like icons of things you don't even have.
Yeah, like the
yet.
Ocarina of Time menu is just terrible.
This is why I argue that the 3DS release of that game is like the quintessential version of it.
Does anyone argue back with you?
Now that you think about it, no.
Yeah, it's just the better version.
Yeah.
This is a weird case of an early 3D game being mechanically not messy while still being mechanically all over the place, and certainly narratively all over the place. Like, it has focus in every way that isn't its like specific mechanical conceits at every moment. Everything that you're doing, even if they're just like one-off mechanics that they're throwing for fun and diversity, none of it felt to me when going through the game like it was some unrefined bullshit thing like the Bayonetta motorcycle section.
Yeah, I mean, this game gets away with. I don't say that implies some negativity that I don't think I actually mean here. This game does a really good job of taking things that would be like a difference in kind in a different game and sort of mapping it to the game in a way that makes sense. So like your biggest, like the things that most break the mold of the rest of the game are things like resisting the torture, which is just like mashing a button, or a few weapons where you actually have to use first person aiming, which is something that most people who have played games are used to by now. Yeah. So it does it has a good process, I guess, for making the game fresh and new, but not totally like giving you a different control set.
Andy,
yeah,
how did some of those like completely maddening off the wall scenes like torture resistance through button presses in 1998 end up landing with you when you played it now?
Some of the stuff, like the crazier stuff, I already knew about. Like I already knew about the whole Psycho Mantis boss fight, but like for the torture resistance scene felt really effective, but they made like the decision that like you can't continue after that and you have to replay from your last save if you fail.
Right.
So I failed and was like, well, I don't want to do that again. Like I have to watch that whole cutscene. And so I just submitted to the torture the second time. So like I feel like great concept, somewhat clunky execution. But at the time, I know that wouldn't have bothered me at all, and I probably would have done it over and over again until I got it.
Yeah. I think that's a valid thing, but also I believe, and I might be wrong on this, that torture is generally considered like a difficult thing to resist.
Yeah, so definitely.
It's possible that they chose to do that specifically to...
It was already physically hard to do, though.
Yeah.
Like, they did not, like... Because, like, I've played games my whole life, and I've done plenty of QuickTime events. Like, I've played Pokemon Stadium with, like, the mini game where you have to mash the A and B buttons to charge up the thing.
Oh, yeah.
Pikachu's and the Voltorbs. Played tons of that kind of crap, but I couldn't do this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sitting there just, like, putting the controller on the table and, like, mashing the circle button.
If you'd like me to regale you with the story of how I resisted torture the first time...
So, yeah, I just gave up.
I took a pen and put the controller on the table and just like ran the pen over the button over and over again because I read somewhere that works, and it did. So that's how I resisted torture the time that I did.
So yeah, I think it was already gated by your physical ability to push the button plenty well enough that they should have just let you try it over again immediately.
I see. I'm glad to know that I am now the real man of the podcast.
Who just mashed with your thumb.
Yeah, who can just resist torture without even doing any silly bullshit to the controller. Just holding it in my goddamn hands like a controller and pressing the button fast enough to beat it.
I couldn't do it. You're more machine than man, JJ.
Thank you.
I think I had a turbo button on a GameCube controller that I may have used.
Is this like the one time when turbo buttons existed
that they were useful?
Where they were useful? Because like turbo buttons always existed, well, at least predominantly existed back in like the PS2 era, when games generally, at least pre-RE4, didn't have like tons of QuickTime events, and certainly not tons of like contextual press a button a million times QuickTime events.
Yeah, I had an N64 controller. I had SNES controllers that had turbo buttons on them. Mm-hmm. But I think the turbo button's secret actual use is to flag for you that the third-party controller that you're buying is a piece of shit. So I don't necessarily know. They're still useful for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Probably useful for like Mario Party.
Yeah, if you wanted to cheat, your friends over, and you're like, here you go, you can have the first party controller. You slide the turbo knob over, get ready to lose, motherfucker.
Knob? You had like twist knobs?
I had an N64 controller that had a turbo button that had variable speeds.
Wow.
Yeah. It had like a little switch that would go into three positions. Yeah.
Oh. I was thinking it was like
a big volume knob or something.
Like above the joystick, you just had this like 3 times the radius of the joystick. Big old controller. Something you could have used to like move remote controlled cars.
Right.
Which is, by the way,
the worst way to control a remote control car.
Yeah. Why did that become the dominant method to control remote controlled cars?
Because it looks like a steering wheel.
Yeah, because it's gimmicky, and like when someone looks at it, they think it seems like a good idea. In reality, it is not.
Mm-hmm. To get back to turbo buttons, now to the game at hand, the one thing that you did mention.
JJ. My name's JJ.
I'm trying to think. The thing that actually, Andy's the one who mentioned it. The Sega Mantis fight obviously had a pretty huge impact on me when I was a kid, given my like AOL Instant Messenger screen name, including the word Psycho Mantis in it. I believe I went as Psycho Mantis for Halloween in the 6th grade.
Whoa!
Nice.
How
many people just thought you were a terrorist?
Well, a lot of people thought that I was just like a weird kid wearing a lot of belts across his chest. Because that's what I was.
And the gas mask. That's a pretty important piece.
It is. So I don't know. Probably all of them. But that is like... Because I think that the Psycho Mantis fight most resembles what I really liked about Metal Gear Solid 2 in the like kind of wacky out of the box way that they structured that boss fight, and it stands out as like one of 2 boss fights in this game that I actually enjoy playing. So that's but that like Kojima element that we've talked about on like the PT episode or whatever is something that I really think not only did I enjoy it when I played this game, I think does really hold up. Like, I think that kind of thing is still just crazy enough to work.
His fuckery is timeless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most of it, anyway.
Fair enough.
But, yeah, I think that's one of the things that, like, got my expectations a little too high, is that was how I thought of this game. Is that I knew that stuff.
Right.
The weird Kojima stuff. And so, like, the game doesn't have a lot of that in the first chunk.
It doesn't really have a lot of that generally.
Well, it gets more and more, like,
bizarre
as it goes. And there's more just, like, weird boss fights and stuff. Like, at the beginning, it's, like, almost like it's a different game.
Right.
And it kind of, like, develops the weirdness as it goes.
The contrast, I think, is really important. Certainly it's one of the things that makes it stand out. Like, people think of Metal Gear Solid now as a quirky series, often because when you look back, things like the Psycho Mantis fight get like accented really. They just seem so much louder in retrospect. But the thing that I think serves to make a lot of this stuff so just inexplicable is that it's not alongside things that are weird for weirdness' sake. Like, this is not a Katamari situation where you're looking at someone at a game with a narrative that's attempting to take itself like relatively seriously as just like a straightforward like 80s movie action plot, but has all this other bullshit like, references to anime and cyborg love dramas and whatever.
It is like a weird mashup between like an 80s like American action film and like weird like sci-fi Japanese influenced like sections.
I think that the game has trappings of an 80s action movie. The game shies away from giving Solid Snake like quippy one-liners in later entries in the series, where they are totally present in this game. I think the big difference is that unlike the campy 80s movies that we're sort of comparing it to here, this game has like a level of subtext to it, and actually has like a point that it wants to make. The villains are over the top and a little bit supernatural and do want to take over the world, but the game itself is like about nuclear war, to the point where while this crazy shit is going on, you're not interacting with it at all until the very end. And for the most part, you're just talking to people about nuclear deterrent and the political relationships between superpowers in the world. And all of this stuff, and Snake is very invested in it, and the Colonel is very invested in it. And it is like the thing that actually drives their character stories forward. But then also you have to wonder if love can bloom on a battlefield, and it gets like into that like personal level as well, and it's, I think, a little bit more hit or miss on that.
Yeah, I feel like it gets the balance mostly right. Like, even though like there's like these fantastical elements, like each of the bosses is humanized before they die, and like everything's kind of like contextualized in like a realistic or serious enough way that it never feels like it gets too goofy.
Yeah. Later iterations on the series, partially because I think advances in graphical technology allowed you to let them put in sharper and sharper relief the realistic elements from the fantastical elements. Those things in the future would start to feel weirder and a little bit more out of place. I remember going through Metal Gear Solid 4 and thinking that like trying to like humanize and talk about the horrors of war from these child soldiers, when the thing that I'm having the conversation about is like a techno future cyber 16-year-old with an octopus head and like camouflage abilities. Like it, as things got further and further progressed, that those things started to contrast and push against each other more. But for now, it's just enough in like the near future that you can still... They had the freedom of sci-fi elements and the realism of a grounded setting.
It's like the Jaws effect, where like the limitations made it better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not only that, but like, I think going forward, they really honed in on the things that were successful about Metal Gear Solid 1, which are choosing your own way through an area in a stealth combat game, and the Psycho Mantis boss fight. And they just expanded that into the Metal Gear Solid series going forward.
Yeah, it's specifically about, I don't think we've like specifically mentioned this, but like the thing about the Psycho Mantis boss fight is that it takes advantage of the medium in interesting ways.
Right.
And that's what's so great about it, is like he reads the information from your memory card and he forces you to like put the controller in slot 2 to beat him. Which even like to this day, like if any other franchise has done something like that, like not that I know of anyway. And like that kind of stuff is just really cool. And it's the kind of thing I'd like to see more of in games. It's harder to do now.
Right.
But...
And there's a level of it, because you can see games that sort of like reward you for having other games by the same developer. Like I've seen that happen before. It'll be like, oh, if you have a save from this game, like you'll start this game with $1,000 or whatever. But those are things that are like kind of explicitly used to get you to purchase other games for something. Knowing anything about the fact that he reads Konami game information from your memory card before going into that ruins it immediately.
Yeah.
And so it's like something that cannot be used for advertising purposes.
Right.
It's literally just there to fuck with you, and that's like super good.
Yeah, and it fake changes the channel on you.
Yeah, the Hideo.
Yeah. So goofy.
It even like waits and then puts it smaller in the corner.
Yeah.
Like I had a TV that did exactly that with the word video that I played Metal Gear Solid 1 on for the first time. So it actually did get me. Whereas like in the HD era, that's not.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
like, kids now wouldn't even get that.
Yeah. What they should do is anytime they release this, make it so that it cuts out in a little box that says like input not detected comes
Right.
up. Like that's what you need.
But yeah, it's hard to do that kind of stuff now because not everything's as uniform. Like, controllers are wireless.
Yeah.
Like...
It was even complicated to get it to work on the PS3.
Yeah.
Because you have to
there's no
go
memory
to a menu.
cards anymore, etc.
Yeah.
Like, you can't count that everybody's going to have the same stuff.
Yeah. So now everybody's memory is completely clean.
Yeah.
That's what he says if you don't have...
I guess that.
Okay. I'm thinking that after a break, we should come back and discuss the mechanics, because that's one thing that, Andy, you brought up, specifically felt clunky to you, and I'm sure you have opposing thoughts to that, and I'm actually somewhat in the middle.
All right.
So let's take a break.
Sounds perfect.
All right.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a nice day.
See you later. So now the J-Train's gone.
So when we left off, so we're going to talk about the mechanics, because Andy implied that he didn't think they particularly held up. I'm kind of almost in the same boat with that. So let's start with the positive, and say, I think that the base stealth mechanics of this game are still just as like relevant now as they were then. And I think probably ended up influencing a lot of how stealth games were made from this point forward.
Well, I don't have the same history and pedigree of stealth games in general. I've played every Metal Gear game, and I, of course, have experienced stealth in a lot of the ways that stealth has been in the future forced into other, like, third or first person generalized action games, your Assassin's Creeds, your Dishonored, your things like
Zeldas.
that. Yes, I guess now your Zeldas.
Even in Wind Waker, Link could push himself against a wall like Solid Snake.
And he could put himself in a barrel.
Oh, yeah.
Just like a cardboard box.
Yeah, like a cardboard barrel.
Yeah, one of those.
Yeah.
But I would not call myself like a stealth game aficionado. I've never played Thief. I've never had a particular interest to. And the things that draw me to this series aren't even necessarily the stealth action. It's a lot of the things that are ancillary and around that. Like, I really do like not just the Kojima bullshit, but the mechanical bullshit that you always have to go to. I like the way that all the systems interact together. So I enjoy going through all of the systems that you're discussing here. I really like the way that the camera moves in particular. I don't know if that's been done before. I can't imagine they had many opportunities to do so pre-3D. But the feeling that you get backing against the wall and like peering out from the side looking for your genome soldier in their cool little like white vest neck thing walking around for you. It's a kind of tension that I really associate with this series, and I think has come to define a lot of what good stealth became in the future.
Yeah. I think that this game, while obviously did not like invent stealth, definitely made it like way more accessible to the general public. Which is a thing that previous stealth games just are not. Like, I did play the original Thief. It wasn't until years and years after... I think I actually played it about 6 months before the Thief 3, like the remake of Thief, came out. Mm-hmm. And I played Thief because a lot of people in the industry that I pay attention to and respect really like Thief. And that is the moment that I realized that I'm my own person. And the fact that someone that I like likes something does not in any way mean that I'm going to be able to grasp and enjoy it in the same way. I'm kind of the same with the original Deus Ex. Games that are really good and that I do respect, but it's like I am not the kind of person who can enjoy it in that way.
Yeah, completely with you on the Deus Ex boat. I've tried to play that 3 or 4 times now, and it always still just feels like something that has a complexity level and is in a certain zone that I just completely missed out on in my life. It's not like something like Doom where the mechanics are simple enough that I can go back to it even though I'm not really part of that space anymore and still have fun with all the clicking and the madness. Things like Deus Ex you go back to and I'm just like, whoa! What are all of these norms that I don't understand about interacting with this keyboard? And in a lot of ways, Metal Gear, both before this game and now, sort of created their own weird little nest of norms. It's strange going back to this game and having the way that you shoot and the differences between which button is cancel and accept against all industry standards.
That really threw me through a loop.
That is, I believe, the way that the PlayStation controller was actually designed.
Yep.
Yeah, it
they
makes
wanted
sense.
the O button.
Once you explained it to me, X means cancel, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
But nobody else even thought about it. All of the every PlayStation developer was like, X is yes.
Eventually became the standard, that X was the action button.
It's because of the resting place of your thumb. It's always, because the way the angle that it rests is way closer to the X button than the O button, so they want it to be the easiest to hit. The problems that I had with that were highly mitigated, because I literally played every Metal Gear Solid game at the same time straight through. It threw me up, obviously, more going back to it now, but it was only after I got halfway through Metal Gear Solid 1, I never had that problem again, because for 4 months I just reversed my brain.
Yeah, it kept bothering me all the way through.
But that particular control aside, I think everything else was brought back and brought back for a pretty good reason, I would say. The improvements in Metal Gear Solid 2, even on the controls, are fairly minor. It's things being able to go into first-person mode, not minor at all. Pretty huge, actually. But things like you can now pop off a shot after you lean out from behind a wall. Things like that, just sort of somewhere between quality of life and just additional small tactical options. This game really laid the groundwork for that. And somebody who cannot play Thief absolutely could play Metal Gear Solid.
Oh, yeah. There's lots of tiny ways that the game made it easier, even than a lot of later stealth games. I really, really love the alert phase and that as an innovation, especially the way that the alert phase removes the biggest crutch that you have mechanically in the game, your radar. It's I spent more time watching that radar off and going through stealth action segments than I did even looking at the legitimately cool cinematic sequences that you're trying to move through sometimes.
Yep.
So having that just blink out of existence when you mess up, and now feeling like you're on your own in a grounded space. It almost reminds me of going into a random encounter in a Final Fantasy game in a weird way, where you go from this abstracted view because you're thinking really high and mighty about getting through this space and all these problems, and now you zoom in really quickly to deal with a specific action problem.
Right.
Yeah. And it not being a straight fail-safe is great for people who are new to stealth action games, while you are punished highly for taking bullets in this game. I can generally escape, particularly if you're smart with your tools, and the tools that they give you are super versatile, like we discussed in the first half, so that's very helpful with escaping like that. The alert phase is just so mind-blowing, and I think that's part of why the little exclamation point and the sound that plays with it has just become so emblematic in game culture forever.
Yeah. I have to imagine that Andy and I were both, during that whole conversation, thinking about the bathroom of death right down the hallway from the Sega Manus fight. There are 2 restrooms. There's the one that you meet Meryl in, and then there's the men's restroom. And while I was watching Andy play through this game, he set off an alarm. Mm-hmm. And then, how many people did you kill?
It seemed like an unlimited string of people just kept coming into the bathroom. And they would I'd break a guy's neck and then go hide in the stall, and then another guy would come in. I'd break his neck, go hide in the stall.
Well,
then another guy would come. It's like it kept happening at like this like very specific interval. Like another guy wouldn't show up till the first guy was dead, and then another guy just kept coming.
And it was like he would wait. The alarm would go off, and then it would go into the evasion mode. And then once evasion mode ran out, the guy who had just run into the bathroom would go take a leak.
Yeah, he would run in, and then the thing would run out because I was hiding, and he didn't come look in the stall. And then after, it went back to normal, he would just go take a piss.
It was just this, like, hysterical string of people coming in and him killing them.
But my experience with, like, the radar was that I paid attention to it a lot as well. But then, like, once a guard came nearby, my attention shifted to that guy. Mm-hmm. So that if I messed up, I was already not paying attention to the radar. It actually took me a while to realize the radar got jammed when you got caught. Because, like, I would shift my attention. So I didn't really quite have that effect.
I think that is more or less actually how they want the game to play. Uh-huh. The radar seems there as as like a concession because of the limited graphical possibilities of the PS1.
The fact that the camera's so zoomed in.
Yeah.
I can't believe I hadn't brought that up yet, because that's one of my least favorite things about the game. It's how limited my view always felt.
Yeah, because you have that top-down in a lot of areas, but then once you go into any sort of enclosed space, it sort of takes this, like, side view where you're running around things, and it's pretty static and difficult to actually push to view around things. You have to push yourself against walls in order to see down long sight lines.
Yeah.
That's also why they gave the guards such short sight lines, because if people were just seeing you out of nowhere, it would be really irritating.
Mm-hmm.
Like a gun camera.
Yeah. Turning a corner and just getting, like, shot a couple times, like, when you had no way of, like, knowing there was something there is super annoying.
Yeah.
And that's why they needed the Soliton radar is that individual concession. And that was the reason that I became so reliant on it. Mm-hmm. It was because I was looking at vision cones all the time.
Right.
Yeah. So I could do all this, awesome bullshit, like putting C4 on the backs of guards.
Right.
That's a classic, too.
Yeah.
Can you... No, I'm crazy. I was thinking that you could attach claymores to people in later games, but I don't think that you can. I think they always go straight to the ground. You can probably do it in 5, because you can do, like, anything in 5.
Yeah, 5 has no limits.
Yeah.
I'd say I have to mostly agree, though, because I didn't really chime in at all, that I think the core mechanics of this game are solid, no pun intended.
Metal Gear, solid.
But yeah, it's a lot of the nitty gritty of how it's actually controlled that I don't like particularly. Like I mentioned, the camera I think makes it really hard to see, and I hate how I would be running around and accidentally walk up against a wall and press against it when I'm trying to run away from something. That got me killed in a couple of boss fights. And I tried both digital and analog control, and both of them felt a little awkward to control, but that's just kind of typical of older games.
Yeah. I think
it's a lot of little things.
Yeah, that was an issue that I had a lot in Metal Gear Solid 3, actually, because I would always end up running into trees and stealth slapping myself against the tree for some reason.
Stealth slapping.
Yeah, it's even if you hit it, to clip the corner, it seemed in the smallest way you would press against it.
Unless there was a ration on that ledge.
Oh yeah.
And a pit of lava on the other side. Did you in the boiler room? It's not really a boiler. The melting room.
The room with lava.
The blast furnace. That's what it is.
Yeah.
In the blast furnace, there's a right outside the last door before you leave. There's a ration on a ledge.
It's underneath one of the bridges. Mm-hmm. You had to go down underneath.
Were you able to get that ration?
Yeah.
How did you do? We tried for a hour. and kept dying.
It was literally probably 15 minutes of me trying to get it. Because, like, it's on a little sliver, so you have to, like, sidle to it.
Yeah.
But, like, I could not get him to, like, sidle on that wall. Like, at all. I would, like, walk up to the edge and try and press against it, and he would just fall off. Like, I could not get it.
So this was...
And, like, I tried, like, super lightly, like, I tried walking against, like, the wall, and then, like, turning the corner, couldn't get that to work.
Yeah.
I tried, like, crawling over to, like, the exact right position, standing up, and, like, shimmying into the spot, every time right into the lava. Like, it seemed impossible to get.
It's been long enough that I've been to that area that I don't remember if I knew it was there or successfully got it. But
this was so uneventful to me that I don't even have a recollection of having trouble. I just remember knowing where the item was, and I remember getting it because you get items in video games.
Right.
But no, I think I did this automatically in 2 seconds, and I forgot how.
Yeah, because it was when I noticed it when I brought the key back to that room to get it to change to the last key.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm waiting for it to change. I'm going to get that ration because I need him for the boss. Then I know it's coming. And just kept dying. I'm like, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
Nope. It broke me.
And you were right, because there is pretty much always a boss coming,
Yes.
particularly in the second disc.
yeah, this is what I was gonna... The mechanics, I think, start to fall down a bit when they apply them to these boss fights.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you feel about it. I know that you were generally positive on most things in this game.
Yep.
But throughout the entire series, I've never played 4, so up until 3, when I actually did think that they were cool, I hate every boss. There are like 2 bosses in this game that I think are good-ish.
What, like Vulcan has got to be somewhere on that?
Vulcan and Mantis. Mantis is my favorite, Vulcan is my second favorite, and then everything else is the ranges between annoying to like sleep-inducingly terrible.
I'm in the same boat. A lot of the bosses are negatively affected by the camera. Like Revolver Ocelot, I remember being super annoying because you could never see him.
You were also playing Ocelot like super safe.
True, that was like the first boss. I'm
Yeah.
sure if I played it again, it wouldn't be so bad. But yeah, I hated that I could never see him because I couldn't go to the middle of the room or it would explode.
Right.
So that was annoying. And a lot of them just take forever. Either like the bosses have way too much health or your weapons don't do enough damage to them. Because like you die to any of the bosses, it is like an audible ugh comes out of your mouth, even if you're like by yourself, because you're like, oh my god, that took like 15 minutes. And now I have to do it all over again.
I have...
Like Cyborg Ninja, like I had trouble with that fight. Like, my second try, I did, like, pretty well, like, once I realized I had to punch him to death.
Yeah, I think that it's actually overstating it to say that you had trouble with that boss. I think that you did fine on that boss, but he has a bullshit explosion.
Yeah, and then you get him all the way
about.
down, and then he just starts exploding. And then, like, you know, without any warning.
Yeah, almost instantaneously, and it did happen to be he had, like, almost no health. And I forgot that he exploded. I would have warned him. And yeah, he punched him into the last phase, and he exploded and killed him, and he had to redo the whole fight.
Yep, that one and the fight with the Hind, the helicopter.
Even if you do well on that, it takes like 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's oh my god, and it's really hard not to just like get clipped by some stray bullets and stuff. Like it's a lot of little things. Like they just take forever.
And noticing you guys have not mentioned the Sniper Wolf fight. Which is one of my highlights.
That's a good point. The Sniper Wolf fight is fine.
Yeah.
I think the Sniper Wolf fight conversely
really
is a little bit easy, like it's maybe just a smidge too easy.
Yeah.
Because she really only like gets a guaranteed hit off on you when she like will start running and be like, "Ha, just kidding, gotcha," and like turns and just shoots immediately.
Yeah.
Most of the time she gives you a good like 10-second leeway to aim and shoot.
Yeah, it's a lot different than the other fights. It's just like a...
I'm with you on the troubles of length in the Hind fight and length in the Cyborg Ninja fight. For some reason, specifically the Cyborg Ninja fight really does not stick in my memory very much. I think it's because I didn't really engage with it. I didn't find it enjoyable enough for it to make a long-term experience, or maybe I just didn't like what's his otaku face enough that I've scrubbed memories of him.
Hal Emmerich.
That's him, yeah, Emmerich.
Otacon.
Yeah. Examples of, like, other moments. How did you guys feel about, like, the climactic punching on top of Rex finale?
You didn't get there.
I didn't actually beat Rex.
Yeah. Which is fair, I think. I remember thinking when I played it the first time as one of, like, the strongest memories of the game, where I was like, it's so good. Thinking about it in retrospect and then playing it other times, I just like the sword fight at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2 better enough that I'm, like, now more lukewarm on punching Liquid.
You can't compare everything to Metal Gear Solid 2's improvements, because they are improvements. But it's because it's the second game on a new console.
I'm saying it influenced my opinion.
It did.
But it's good. I think it's a fine thing to do.
As somebody who didn't actually get to it, because I ran out of time and it was real hard.
Yeah.
I think it really works on, like, a narrative level and a thematic level that they just, like, have a fist fight at the end.
Yeah.
Because they're both clones of the same guy. But I think, like, the game is not designed for hand-to-hand combat.
I agree.
You have, like, a 3-hit combo. punch, punch, kick, or whatever.
That's exactly
and, like,
it, yeah.
that is not very fun, but, like, I think it works in this game.
I'm stunned by how well it works in that fight. It's a 3-hit combo, plus a lot of, like, fine control over your motion, plus the ability to duck under kicks.
Right.
Like, that's all it takes. And it turned that final climactic fight into me, particularly back with the first time I played it, and less so today, where I know I can remember some of the strategies that I used the first time, into this, like, huge, super difficult, like, actual bare-knuckle brawl where I spent, like, an hour and a half just, like, it was like a Dark Souls fight. Like, I was just sitting there, like, desperately just pushing my head against the wall trying to beat
Pushing
this.
it against the wall?
Yes!
It wasn't a bash. You know,
I'm just imagining, like, an animated version of that where you, like, press your head against the wall until it pops.
Right. I had to just keep applying force. No stops, no breaks. I just sat there and just kept restarting.
This is actually
the same
something
fight.
I don't remember. When you die in that fight, it just puts you back at the beginning of that fight, right?
I don't remember.
How do you not remember if you did it a bunch of times?
Maybe my mind was in such a focus.
Yeah.
He would remember if he had to fight Rex, again.
All three phases.
No, you don't fight Rex.
That's good.
Yeah,
okay.
If that's what. I thought you meant like a cutscene or something.
No,
but
I guarantee you, it starts with a cutscene. It's Metal Gear.
But yeah, it felt like you were going through a fighting game in that sequence, despite how incredibly simplistic the mechanics were. And I guess because of the changing behaviors in Liquid as it goes through its different phases, and the fact that they only had to have enough mechanics to have one good fight.
Right.
Yeah, it really set that up.
That's a good way of putting it. One good fight, because the Cyborg Ninja fight was not that fight.
Nope. Not at all.
But yeah, I thought it was definitely good. It's definitely really memorable, and it's probably one of the better ways that you can end a game is with something that, like,
meaty.
Yeah,
manly.
just like
with
man slapping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love games that end with man slapping.
Yeah,
Shirtless man slaps. It's the meatiest way to end a game.
It really is. It's one of the meatiest ways to end a game. What I mean, of course, is actually, like, just having a fist fight with, like, the not only the final boss, but, like, the boss who is a direct clone of your character. Mm-hmm. Like, that kind of a boss fight is always satisfying.
It's just very well set up and executed. Like, it works on a lot of levels. Like, it works narratively. It's satisfying mechanically. It fits the action movie theme.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, it just works.
And I bet Guile's theme goes with it.
Because the thing that makes the, like, we're going to throw down our guns and all of our toys thing in actual action movies trope interesting? What?
I just thought of
what?
how bad this concept was botched in Assassin's Creed 2.
Yeah. Go listen to our episode on Assassin's Creed.
Much better than punching the Pope to death.
Yeah. That should be the tagline of Metal Gear. Metal Gear Solid, better than punching the Pope to death.
Yeah, because it totally does not work. What's his name? Desmond? No, that's the name of the real guy. Ezio.
That's the one.
Ezio's like, well, let's have an honorable duel, Pope. Throw down your weapons. Let's have a fist fight.
Yeah.
There, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But here it actually works.
Here it works really well because it's set up.
In the same way, just like 80s action movies, the thing that makes those fistfights crazy is because you know that people can actually do fistfights, but that's not the predominant way that they interact with things. And in this game, you don't predominantly use the 3-hit combo to deal with problems. You use your like weaponry and contextual tools and things like that. So it functions in the same way as those movies where it feels like disempowerment, like just one force against the other. But they somehow manage to avoid like a lot of the pitfalls that having these contextual things do. This is something that I'm not sold about, and I've mentioned a couple of times. Most of the times in action games like this, where you keep switching up like set pieces and new distinct mechanics, you fall into these like trouble circumstances. Lots of games like this really hamstring themselves by constantly switching their mechanics and constantly forcing you to like relearn new sets of interactions and things like this. Why does it work in this game?
I think we touched on it earlier. I think as Chad was saying, is they don't really change the core mechanics. Is they force new scenarios into those mechanics.
Yeah, it's because the controls in a Metal Gear game, I think, just personal opinion, I think to the detriment of Metal Gear Solid 5, but to the like as a positive in every other Metal Gear Solid game, the controls are really dexterous and they can really represent a lot of things, and you have a lot of actions available to you. So when it does switch it up and say like this is a fist fight, you have to punch this guy to death, it doesn't feel like it's a different thing. It's like they're just telling you to use a particular tool that you're already familiar with.
It's still the same camera angle, and it's still the same basic controls that you already know.
Right.
It's not like in Bayonetta where like it's an action game where you're punching and kicking and shooting stuff.
And then you play Galaga.
You do like a Star Fox game. Like stapled onto it. It would be like in Bayonetta if they took away the guns and you just had to have a fist fight.
Right.
And it just controlled the same. You know, it's like they've kept the same mechanics and have forced a new scenario into it.
Yeah, the banned version of this fight is the one where they give you, where a screen pops up that says like X is a light attack, circle is heavy.
Yeah, it's not like they tried to actually implement a new fighting game system. It's just the regular controls.
Yeah, and Metal Gear games have always been like this. They always have these like crazy contextual systems, so much so that most people will get through them without actually knowing all the different things you can do by like lightly pressing a switch instead of completely holding it down.
That was the exact comparison I was going to make. Is starting in Metal Gear Solid 2, they started having those like, because the buttons were pressure actuated, so you could they actually did have mechanics built into that, but they chose them so well because it was things that weren't absolutely at no point did it necessitate you actually doing things like that. And this game propels it, like the fist fight, especially at the end, propels it forward so much with the theme of the game and the tone of the scene leading up to it, where it's like you don't even, at no point you're like, well, it's like they're making me play a dumb fighting game now.
Yeah.
Like you're just like, now I gotta punch Liquid Snake to death because he's a fucking bastard. And you're into it and you want to do it, and I think that helps. Or you don't want to do it because you find Liquid to be like a sort of a sympathetic character, which I could totally buy at some point as well, with his whole speech about getting all the shit genes.
Andy, how did you feel about the narrative of Metal Gear Solid?
This is another thing where we've thrown around the phrase Kojima bullshit a lot. I was expecting this game to be much weirder, actually, than it ended up being. I feel like later in the series it probably gets weirder. But like this, it felt really reserved at first. And once it started ramping up and getting weird, like once you get to probably Psycho Mantis on is when I started enjoying the game a lot more. 'Cause I never thought it got too weird or too over the top. Like, I thought it hit this sweet spot where all the weird stuff really made it memorable. And I cared enough. Like, there were enough realistic character interactions. Like we were talking about before, I think this game strikes a really nice balance.
Yeah, and we've actually managed to get all the way to here without ever saying Meryl's name.
Yeah.
I think I said it when I talked about the bathroom.
Yeah.
But I feel as though the fact that they can have characters like Meryl in this game and have them actually make some amount of sense, barring Solid Snake only ever talking about her ass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for the first 4 times you talk to her. Yeah, like, they did a really good job with her character because they build up a relationship between them, and like Snake as the character has motivation to care about her. Then they put you in the torture scenario and they make it personal. Like, if you fail it, then you feel like you failed her as a player. Or if you succeed, you're like, yeah, I saved your life, bitch.
Yeah. What's weird is that it does take until that point before, like, the interpersonal relationship between the two characters actually starts to really, like, seem more believable.
Yeah, it feels organic that way.
Yeah.
Like, it's like these extreme circumstances have made them develop feelings for each other.
Yeah. Meaning that the one stumbling block is when Psycho Mantis is like, she has a large place in her heart for you, and you're like, all I was doing the whole time was hitting on her. Like, I feel like this is impossible that that's the case.
Yeah,
but I think she's well characterized. But it's the fact that she's like a rookie soldier who has her backstory bleeds into the backstory of this game and the idea of like genome soldiers and. All of the subtext about war and people being born and bred for battle that they pushed further in later games of the series. Meryl's sort of like the poster child for that aspect of the narrative, and the fact that they made her a character and made her a character who can be important, I think is really impressive. This game is the most heavy-handed with its like message.
Mm-hmm. I think you kind of had to be back then, though, because you had limited space to get everything across.
Right.
Like, I think, knowing Kojima anyway, like, he totally would have wanted to flesh Meryl out more so that conversation with Psycho Mantis made more sense, but, like, you just have to, like, cut stuff because you got, like a gigabyte of space?
Yeah.
For audio.
Yeah. That was it. One thing I took note of when I heard this originally. Rob Zachney said on an episode of Idle Weekend, he was like, I feel like a lot of people, the first game that they ever play with subtext is a Metal Gear Solid game. As like their first exposure to subtext like comes from Kojima. I feel like that would almost be would be less of an insult if it was this game, because the subtext is so like on Front Street, especially when they like break the game's general like presentation to just like give you live action news footage. Which like seems jarring, and especially in the abstract when somebody was like, let's put like just footage of a bomb test in our game. People were probably like, no? Like, that's weird. We shouldn't do that. But it works in this game.
See, I think
to some
that's
extent.
One of the only things that doesn't work. I thought that was, like, really weird and out of place. And I'm like, did they just put that in?
I got some bad news for you. It continues through the whole series.
Yeah. It's definitely his attempt to try and staple a game that's doing its best to look cinematic and grounded, but obviously can't because it's a PlayStation 1 game.
Yeah.
He's trying to staple it to the real world with these scenes. Like, he's already dealing with these really weighty real world themes, and he knows that in games like that, it can be really hard for people's suspension of disbelief to allow them to treat the like square face people that they're seeing interact in front of them as if they're, the people whose lives are going to be affected by nuclear war. Mm-hmm. So I think Kojima's weird solution to that was to try and be like, oh, I'm going to show them it's the real world by just putting the real world into this game.
Yeah, kind of. I think the codec kind of helps with that too.
Yeah.
Like giving a more realistic looking illustration of everybody's faces really goes a long way.
Absolutely.
And the codec conversations themselves also added to being able to, like, having the choice to have a long-form conversation with somebody to flesh out their character is a lot more effective than just having that person explain their character background, which happens kind of a lot in games. And this game gives you the option to, like, be like, I want to hear this. And in Metal Gear, generally I do.
Yeah. I gotta admit, though, that I did find the ending versions of those, like, spaced out real-world grounded scenes extended to a point where it sort of broke for me, and I found them kind of laughable. Like, once the deer hit screen, it was just the heaviest hand, right?
Yeah.
It was a lead hand that was being forced on you as a player.
He's usually really good at that kind of thing, but his lead hand kind of... I don't know. I could not find a way to
No similar there, yeah.
Under the push of Kojima's lead hand.
You could see the lead hand of the designer there.
Yeah.
I've already been yelled at for talking already too much about sequels to Metal Gear. But I think that the ending of Metal Gear Solid 2 is, like, the absolute worst use of it, because they have this whole conversation, and I love all the dialogue, but it's just, like, people on the street forever. Like, it's literally, like, 10 to 12 minutes of just footage of people walking. And I'm like, I really want to just see that bomb test from the first game again. That was short and got the point across.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about, like, the different endings? Like, the fact that it has, like, a split?
I don't really care.
I mean, wasn't this one of the first games to really do something like that? Isn't that interesting? Maybe not.
Honestly, no. I'm going to put my foot down here and say it's not interesting the way they did it. It's not, like, actively bad. It's not a terrible thing. But, like, whether or not Meryl dies and you end up leaving with your guy friend or your girlfriend, I don't think really informs that much of a difference in your character or the events that happened around it. Like, it's... really, in my mind, it's just a difference between who's sitting there beside you. I guess things have a little bit of a sadder tone after Meryl's departure.
Yeah, with Otacon.
And it makes a little bit more sense that Snake's being so, like, romantic about all the things he says. But I sort of always just chalk up that, like, weird, heavy-handed romance to the narrative being heavy-handed. And I don't really think about it as inconsistency between Snake and his actions.
Yeah. Like, I think... I'm pretty sure that it's just canonical that Meryl dies. So...
Is it?
Well, I mean, I'm not 100%, but I don't know how Otacon leaves the facility.
I was going to say, I thought she was in 4.
She's in 4.
Oh.
Yep. They're
Did
both
you just
alive.
Spoil it?
I did.
You are a nice guy for correcting me on the podcast. I didn't see
I didn't even know that was, like...
It's not
an
even
unknown thing.
Yeah, it's not even treated like a surprise. She
just,
like,
know
shows
so
up as part
little
of
about Metal Gear Solid 4.
Don't.
I'm gonna play it.
I know you will. I know you will before you're dead.
I'll probably like it.
You'll probably think it's all right. I mean, do you like playing high-res, slightly worse versions of things the series has already done?
I've played Metal Gear Solid 2 13 times. I'm going to guess that I will enjoy playing the same content over again.
Fair. Yeah. I didn't bring this up naturally at any other point, but since you're having so much fun making Metal Gear Solid 2 references, I want to say that I think the weird sort of combination that has come to define the series as a whole between the fantasy elements that he constantly, Kojima that is, wants to ground as hard as he can into these weighty, like, issues in reality, was done best in Metal Gear Solid 3, and I think that's a lot of the reason that people look fondly back on it, which is sort of ironic since it takes place in the past, so all this future conflict sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff that's fantastical that happens in Metal Gear Solid 3 seems pulpy in the same way that people look at Like, it seems like it's intentionally being pulpy
right.
instead of being perceived as pulpy by other people because of the weird mix of stuff that's going on.
Yeah. You really don't have to look any further than the pain in Metal Gear Solid 3 to see, like, how far they went to characterize the actual, like, magical realism that is in that game as being, like, very localized to these characters.
Yes.
Like, and that's, and that's fine. The Metal Gear Solid 2 obviously does its bad guy team the worst, I think, of the first 3 games anyway. But, like, they're way more integrated into the weirdness, and the weirdness is integrated more into the story. And that's really what separates it, because Metal Gear Solid 1 is a game about war.
Yeah.
And Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game about war and the people in the war. And Metal Gear Solid 2 is a game about games.
Yes.
Like, it's a different sort of thing that is being gone for there.
But way ahead of the curve on that.
Oh, the game about games
yeah.
thing? It was so far ahead of the curve that, like, nobody got it when it came out. Like, most of them, I didn't get it. Like, it took me a while.
I only know, I've never played the rest of the series, obviously. It's my first time playing any Metal Gear games. But what I know about it, I find really fascinating, and I really want to play Metal Gear 2.
Yeah.
There's no way we stop
Metal Gear
doing...
2 Solid Snake on the NES.
Fuck you.
There's no way we're going to get through this podcast without one day doing Metal Gear Solid 2.
Well, it's like Chad's favorite game. So.
I know. And it's unbelievably dense and has a ludicrous amount of things, mechanically and narratively, to unpack.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
look
forward to that.
Next week.
Not really.
Yeah, just kidding.
You have to wait a long time. It's a long game.
Way long.
Also, we like spacing out things.
It's not that long. It's like 13 hours.
Oh.
This game is like 4 hours if you skip all the cutscenes.
It's really short, this game. Like, even in retrospect, a way that I think is oddly not detrimental to the experience. It makes it feel even more like a movie than it already does, especially since you can sort of contextually expand the time of the game if you wanted to, but based on those codec conversations and little niche things that you can explore like before. It makes the fact that it's on 2 discs like all the more sort of surprising and noticeable when you're like 2.5 hours into a play experience and you're asked to put in a different piece of hardware.
It's just as crazy that the game ends up being a 2-disc game on the GameCube. Like, the Twin Snakes was 2 discs. Like, that's crazy.
Dude, GameCube had lots of, like, stealth 2-disc games. People almost never talk about this. It's a really weird... I don't know a lot about the GameCube hardware. I'm assuming it's a limitation of their, like, stupid tiny discs.
Yeah, I guarantee you it is, yeah. So what you were actually saying... basically is the fact that the fact that it's like a 2-disc thing with such little gameplay makes it, I don't want to say such little, with considerably less gameplay than you would expect from a 2-disc PlayStation 1 game a la Final Fantasy VII.
Yes.
Which I actually think may have been 3 discs.
It is 3 discs.
That's fucking insane.
The 3rd disc is all like for bonus content though.
Fair enough. That it does like push it so close to the like it's just a movie thing that everyone likes to talk about with this game, and obviously it's something that they embrace, and the series has enough fans that it's obviously not a thing that a lot of people tend to think is a bad thing, but it is kind of wild to think about like just how much of this game you spend either in a cutscene or in a codec conversation.
Yeah. I mean, for me, playing it for the first time, it took me about, 10 hours to play through this, so I think it's not as extreme on a first playthrough.
Yeah.
But, I think I really didn't find that, maybe because I was braced for it, but I didn't think the cutscenes were, that bad. I think it's all the optional codec stuff that really piles up in the memory.
Yeah.
Or the space.
That gets... Okay, The thing that I don't like that Metal Gear does, that I think all Metal Gears do, but we'll localize it here, is that occasionally you end up with a cutscene that leads into a codec conversation that leads into another cutscene. Like that codec conversation sandwich situation that they get sometimes. That gets a little bit irksome, I think, because the strength of the codec conversation is that you can have them sort of whenever. Like, if you're just, like, in any other game you would have, like, paused to, like, send a text message or read a tweet or something, you could just boot up a codec conversation and, like, call someone and be like, hey, Natasha, what up? And she'll be like, well, the gun that you're using is kind of cool, because I don't do Russian accents. And I think that's one of their biggest things, is, like, you're not ever just sort of, like, listening to a conversation for an hour. But the cutscenes sometimes will just make you do that to get plot. But otherwise, I think they're pretty well done. And the voice acting obviously helps.
Oh, yeah.
We were just out of shit to talk about Metal Gear Solid 1.
Shit.
Actually, I have a question, because I saw you play it. I know how I play this game.
Yeah.
Curious, did you, like, just gun motherfuckers down in this game? Like, ever? Like, just as, like, stress relief?
I mean, in elevators.
Okay, but otherwise you, like...
appeared.
Yeah. Twice in a row. I was just kidding, because, like, the game has very little penalty for just murdering people in a way that, like, the later games totally do.
Yes.
And I found that to be, like, kind of weird to look back on, because, like, in Metal Gear Solid 2, they leave corpses. And that's such a huge change. Because in Metal Gear Solid 1, you can gun down 12 people and then hide behind a box, where in real life you would be, like, wading through viscera, and if someone would just walk right by you.
Right.
I mean, whatever. Nothing here.
I think natural gamer instincts, in a lot of ways, really help mitigate that problem in this, because what it does cost you is ammunition. And even though if you actually played the game really optimally, you'd probably be using a whole lot more ammunition than you're given.
Right.
You still have this innate sense that you need to save these things, and it further incentivizes you to go the stealth route, even if it might be hypothetically possible that you could just gun people.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also sort of, like, they're clearly feeling out, at least in the 3D space, a lot of these stealth sections, moving over from the old 2D NES Metal Gear games. And I'm assuming because of the hardware limitations and wanting to do as much story as they did, like, this game has surprisingly less stealth in it than I assumed that it would.
Yeah.
I don't, for many reasons, if we've already described, I don't think it's an actively bad thing. In fact, this is still my favorite, I think, of the whole series personally, though I certainly can't argue that Metal Gear Solid 2 is, I think, the like, better achievement, so to speak. But like, for a marketed stealth action game, this had a lot more, like, movie style narrative vignettes than it did stealth action.
Yeah, that's, I think, a fair way to put it.
Luckily, it was good.
Yep. And fortunately, it did not get into the, like, boundless confusion that some parts of the later series games get into, making it a lot more palatable and generating an audience that was more prepared for that, I think.
Yeah. Come and see us when we talk about Kingdom Hearts 3, when boundless confusion and alienating audiences will be primary themes.
Also on Podcast Sidebar.
You just wait until we do our commentary.
It's also on Podcast Sidebar.
Yeah.
If there's a situation where we do Kingdom Hearts 3, but we don't do Kingdom Hearts 2, and I have to rely on memories from 12 years ago.
It's impossible. You won't be able to talk.
Yeah, I would just literally be sitting here with my mouth open. Like,
not only... you would have to play all the other Kingdom Hearts games to be able to talk about it. It's literally that deep in the trenches now that you have to have played them all to have any idea what the fuck's going on.
The barest minimum where you might be able to have some sense is 1, 2, Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance. That's the floor. That's the floor.
Yeah, that's fair.
Wow.
And it's super beneficial to, even though it's the worst game, to play 358 over 2 days. That fills in a lot of holes from 2.
Completely agree, except for the fact that Dream Drop Distance is actually the worst game.
It's the worst narratively. It's not the worst mechanically.
You guys are verging into no longer on podcast sidebar territory.
We're wrestling this sidebar from you.
Yeah. So, do you guys have any final thoughts on Metal Gear Solid 1?
I'm going to keep being surprised how well this is going to hold up in the future, mostly by virtue of how many design traditions that it informed. Like, I can't imagine a future of gaming that is not going to have like big mainline AAA titles that have a lot to thank Metal Gear Solid for. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
And for me, I probably came off like fairly negative. You both like Metal Gear Solid a lot, but yeah, I definitely feel like I definitely appreciate the game. I realize all that it did for the medium, and I really wish...
Blah, blah, blah. Fuck this game.
Et cetera, et cetera. But no, I think developers like Kojima are really important, even if they're crazy people, like, to keep pushing what you can do with video games. And I obviously realize that Metal Gear... There's a lot to thank Metal Gear for in that regard. And... yeah, I think my biggest thing is I felt like this game didn't hold up as well because of expectation.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, like, anybody who plays like Final Fantasy VII or Ocarina of Time now could have the same exact experience with those games.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, not a knock on the quality of the game. It's just my own personal experience is not ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Much like the personal experience of soldiers embedded in modern wars, forced to fight day in, day out for causes they don't believe in.
And then it turns out it's just a simulation put on by the Lali Lule Lo.
But I mean, I think that goes without saying.
Obviously.
Chat, I was hoping to keep doing that for 5 minutes while you put dramatic USA music behind me.
Oh, sorry.
And then turned it into a video podcast by surprise, zooming out from our logo and into dramatic scenes of the wildlife and explosions.
The more that... fuck, I could totally... That's so easy that I could do it. And just done. But then the people who listen on like iTunes or whatever
Right.
would be sad.
And putting it at the very end probably isn't worth it at all.
We'll see.
Well, we can't do it now. I didn't rant for long enough. It wasn't a Metal Gear
true.
Solid quality rant.
Yeah.
But
And
anyway.
I kind of think this is like my least favorite game in the series to play, but also one that I weirdly think is just like... Yeah, like, it's strange how hard it is for me to separate my experience playing the game, where I'm like, there's so many things that I like about this series that this game doesn't do as well, but I'm like, this game is fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much in this game that's really good from pretty much every perspective that you can look at it, and I don't know, that's really how I feel. I feel like it's super good, but then when I'm playing it, I'm like, I don't know if this is super good.
I think fucking awesome might be the single most positive thing that we've, like, the highest review bar we've ever set for anything we've ever talked about. Have we ever cleared fucking awesome?
It's a loaded term, because like when I say fucking awesome, I don't mean like this game is impeccable 10 out of 10 in every way. It's like a game that literally you're just like,
In awe.
yeah. It's a game that warrants the term awesome because of its legacy and the impact that it made, and just the cool shit that it does. And I just don't know that I've described another game that way. We've definitely talked about, like, Shadow of the Colossus is fucking awesome.
Yep.
Yes.
And it's another game that I don't think is an impeccable, like, masterpiece.
I do.
It is a masterpiece, now that I'm thinking about it. We're going on too far. Thank you for listening to NOCLIP this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, we're going to talk about a fucking awesome game called Trauma Center Second Opinion.
Yes.
Which will be... That's Second Opinion, the one that was released on the Wii, just in case it matters, in case somebody's not aware. Because there are several others, but I think this one actually got the most sort of coverage when it came out because of its use of the Wii remote. Until then, if you want to get a hold of us, all of our contact information is on noclippodcast.com. An email address, Twitter, YouTube, etc., etc. check it out, have a good time, listen to some of our older episodes, and then send us email telling us that we're fucking awesome. That's like, for some reason, the catchphrase for this episode.
Until you, like, emergency cut the podcast, I was going to suggest that we create, like, a own version of our Nintendo seal of approval, the most important seal.
The NOCLIP fucking awesome seal.
Approval.
I think we could probably work that out.
Good.
All right.
All right.
Woo! Next time. In which case, then the AI is sentient. I don't think it makes the hermit crab less sentient.
I agree.
All right. I'm glad that we solved that.